Belisarius, Book 3, Rome the Eternal, by Paolo A. Belzoni, published by Arx Publishing, Merchantville, New Jersey. Prologue. In the year of our Lord, 535, the empire of the Romans is at peace. Having crushed the Vandal kingdom in Africa the previous year, the Roman Emperor Justinian has welcomed home his victorious general Belisarius with a grand triumph, a festival not seen in a Roman capital for hundreds of years. Belisarius is also honored with the venerable office of consul, and enjoined to celebrate his achievement with a year of games, much to the delight of the citizens of Constantinople. But while the people celebrate, Justinian cannot rest. Another opportunity has arisen for Roman power to reassert itself in the West. The mighty kingdom of the Goths and Italians, established by Theodoric the Great some 50 years before, is in turmoil. Theodoric's grandson, King Athalaric, has died. Athalaric's mother, the comely Queen Dowager Amalasuntha, the daughter of Theodoric, has been forced by the Gothic nobles to marry her cousin, the conniving Theodatus, so that a man might rule the Goths and Italians. Though a student of Plato and Aristotle, King Theodatus proves a grasping and vacillating ruler. He is also disloyal. Within a month of his marriage, he has caused the queen to be imprisoned on a lonely island on Lake Bolsena, not far from Rome. For Justinian, this unstable situation proves an irresistible incentive. God, he believes, has provided the opening he has prayed for, and in his brilliant commander Belisarius, God has given him the means to do something that no one believes possible: to bring the eternal city of Rome back under the dominion of the Emperor of the Romans. Chapter 1. A.D. 535 May. First year of the reign of Theodatus, king of the Goths and Italians, at Lake Bolsena. A blood-red sun blazed fiercely as it sank into the hills beyond a small Etruscan lake. On the lake's surface, 3 heavily armed men stood silently in a small ferry which inched toward a craggy island. The men appeared to be nobles of the Gothic race, with fierce faces, brutal and angry. At the ferry's bow another man stood, hooded and cloaked, his hands clasped and unclasped around a scroll wound with a golden tassel, and what could be seen of his face showed the shaved cheeks of a Roman. The small boat grounded on a pebbly beach with a crunch, and the 4 men stepped out. With long strides they made their way through the lengthening shadows, stepping over patches of cactus and other succulents that had overgrown the path. They climbed a rough-hewn staircase carved from volcanic rock to reach a small castle that sat on the island's low peak. Approaching the gate, a guard challenged them. "Step aside, king's business," one of the Goths growled. He took out a parchment bearing the seal of Theodatus, king of the Goths and Italians. The guard yielded, and the 4 men strode into the castle as twilight dissolved into night. From a balcony above, a maid spotted the men coming and ran excitedly to her mistress, who had just emerged from her bath. "O Queen! The king's men are here, O Queen!" the maid cried, prostrating herself on the floor. "You dare enter unannounced, Martina," snapped the head lady in waiting, as she arranged her mistress's long blonde tresses into thick, rope-like braids. "Peace, Hilda," the queen said softly, rising to her feet. Though past the age of 40, Amalasuntha, queen of the Goths and Italians, and daughter of King Theodoric the Great, remained a woman of tremendous beauty. Tall and fair as most of her race, she possessed an athletic build and the grace of movement which made the Amal family famous throughout the world. Her physical charm was matched by her intellectual prowess, enhanced by a full Roman education, gained at the insistence of her father. If not for credulity in political affairs and a penchant for violent action when none was called for, she might have remained enthroned in Ravenna, the Gothic capital, instead of languishing as a prisoner. "What men?" the queen asked. Did they carry a standard? No, my queen, the frightened maid stammered. They carried no standard, nor any insignia that I could recognize. But hark, they come. The four men entered the room, but halted behind the screen which partitioned the queen's private bath from the rest of her quarters. The head matron stepped out from behind the partition. Who are you that enters the queen's quarters? The words stuck in her throat as she recognized the men with dread. Where is she? They demanded. You may not enter, Hilda declared bravely, blocking their path. One of the men grabbed her and flung her out of the way like dirty laundry. They burst past the partition and found Amalasuntha sitting proudly in a chair, a purple cloak wrapped around her and a diadem on her head. Crouched on the floor nearby, the maid Martina wept softly. I can only imagine why you are here, Amalasuntha said, recognizing the imposing warriors immediately. All three were the sons of Gothic nobles that she had ordered assassinated during the time she had ruled as regent for her son Athalaric, now deceased. You, however, I have never laid my eyes on, Roman. The hooded man uncovered his head. I am Caligonus. I have come bearing a message from Theodora, God-appointed Augusta of the Roman Empire and your liege. I have no liege, scoundrel, Amalasuntha replied calmly but forcefully. I am a queen. Nevertheless, I am enjoined by our mistress to read this missive to you. The Roman opened the scroll case he carried, removed the letter it contained, and began to read. The most serene and noble Theodora, Augusta of the Romans, to Amalasuntha, once queen of the Goths and Italians. I have no greeting for you, lady, except to say that fate has forced us into opposition, and I would that it were not so. Yet because of your dealings with my husband, and your subsequent failure to hold the throne, while delivering Italy back into the dominion of the Empire of the Romans as you promised, I am forced to see you dispatched from this earthly existence. For it was my husband's wish, after your fall, that you be spirited from your queenly prison to the Queen of Cities, Constantinople. But given your reputation for great beauty, intelligence, and ruthless courage, I could not allow such a thing to happen, lest it throw the palace into turmoil. For when two goddesses are worshipped in the same temple, discord is certain to ensue. As a queen yourself, I am certain you understand me. Therefore, I bid you farewell, Queen Amalasuntha. This life has been unkind to you, but I pray that you will find peace in the life to come. My mistress grieves for your demise, O lady, the Roman said, bowing his head. He then touched the letter to a flame of an oil lamp, and tossed it carelessly into a nearby brazier, where it burned to ash. So my death is the will of Theodora, not that craven coward in Ravenna, Amalasuntha said. Both, said one of the Goths menacingly. Theodotus has no further use for you, and the nobles are clamoring for your death. We will satisfy the blood debt you owe us. The Goth unsheathed his sword. You must not, Hilda screamed, and launched herself between them. The Goth quickly cut her down. Showing no fear, Amalasuntha stood and advanced. I do not begrudge you what you are owed. I have done grievous wrongs, and accept your vengeance as the consequence due to me. She bowed her head, as a few tears worked their way down her cheeks. As my countrymen, I beg your forgiveness for the harm I have inflicted upon you and your family. Visibly affected, the Goth stopped short. He lowered his sword. Have you become a woman, Hermann? One of the other Goths erupted, his face purple with rage. Do you forget that she is not only a murderer but a traitor who wanted to turn our kingdom over to the Romans? She must die, now. He burst forward and grabbed the queen with rough hands. She offered no resistance as he wrapped her long braids around her neck and quickly strangled her to death, throwing her lifeless body to the stone floor. Kill the other maid as well, the Roman ordered coldly. There can be no witnesses. He drew a knife and cut off one of Amalasuntha's braids. My mistress will be pleased to receive this memento of her rival's demise, he thought to himself. At Ravenna, capital of the kingdom of the Goths and Italians. Do you know what will happen now, O king, as a result of this vile act? You will be subjected to war with the emperor. Indeed, a war without truce will be brought upon you, and the full power of Justinian Augustus will be marshaled against you, O unjust autocrat, who imprisoned the beloved Queen Amalasuntha, and allowed her to be impiously murdered in her bath. The clear and stern voice was that of Peter of Illyricum, a trained rhetor, and member of Justinian's diplomatic corps. He had originally been sent by the emperor as an envoy to negotiate with Amalasuntha, but events had moved so quickly that Peter found himself in the privy chamber of Theodatus, attempting to wring concessions out of the new Gothic king. Theodatus had a face like a rodent, clean-shaven, pinched, and sallow, though his yellow hair was always well-oiled and coiffed. Nephew of the king Theodoric the Great, Amalasuntha had raised Theodatus to the throne as her consort, following the death of her son, for the Gothic subjects would not tolerate a woman as their liege lord. Grasping and money-hungry, Theodatus was hated by peasants and nobles, Italians and Goths alike. Amalasuntha assumed she could continue to rule with such a weak man as a figurehead, and bound him to loyalty with terrible oaths which he broke within 2 weeks of taking the throne. Amalasuntha did not reckon how much loyalty the man's money could purchase among the Gothic nobility. "Peace, my friend, peace," Theodatus cried. Aside from a single servant, there was no one else in the room. "I regret the foul fate of my cousin no less than the emperor, I assure you." "Yet you allowed the killers, known as they are, to walk about at liberty," Peter replied. "Had you truly lamented her destruction, you would have had these men arrested and brought to justice." "Listen, Peter, my friend. In due time I will arrest them, I promise," Theodatus scowled. Internally, he was still utterly perplexed at how quickly Peter had learned all the sordid details of Amalasuntha's death. "When?" Peter demanded. "The queen was a friend of the god-beloved emperor. She and he had reached certain accommodations, and the emperor will be curious to know whether you intend to abide by the promises she made to him." "Certainly," Theodatus protested. "Never let it be said that I am any less a friend of the emperor than Amalasuntha was. Only—" Theodatus paused, stroking his bare chin. "Only what?" Peter said imperiously. "What did Amalasuntha promise the most pious emperor of the Romans?" "I shall tell you plainly," Peter replied. "She said that she would cede authority over all of Sicily and Italy to Justinian Augustus, and retire to Constantinople to live in peace for the remainder of her days. The same offer is now made to you. The Goths will be permitted to retain their holdings north of the river Padus, and shall enjoy friendly relations with the empire, but the rest of Italy shall come under direct imperial control." Theodatus grimaced, and his pale blue eyes bulged out of their sockets. "My subjects will not accept that," he replied, attempting to sound bellicose. "I have many resources to draw upon. If the emperor intends to take Italy from us, we Goths will fight." Peter laughed. "You fight? O king, you are no warrior. All men know that you've never in your life hefted a sword or bent a bow. You are a philosopher, a patrician, used to luxury. You ascended the throne due to your family connections, not as a reward for your battlefield prowess. How can a man like you hope to stand against Belisarius, the master strategist who destroyed the great Vandal kingdom, with his household soldiers alone? Do you doubt that the emperor would send any other against you?" "Listen," Theodatus said in a conciliatory voice. "Go and tell the emperor that Theodatus intends to rule his kingdom as a friend and ally of the god-defended empire of the Romans, as his uncle Theodoric once did. Tell him that our ports remain open to his trading ships, and that we will watch over and protect Italy, as we have for the past 60 years. And tell him that I will punish the reprobates who murdered the queen. Tell him all that, Peter, my friend, and do your utmost to assuage his anger." Theodatus took Peter's hand and patted it. At the same time, He slipped a pouch filled with gold coins into Peter's sleeve. Such misbegotten trust, Peter thought to himself. How like a petty tyrant to believe that he can purchase the loyalty of one who belongs to the emperor. Peter pocketed the money. I shall do my best for you in Constantinople, he lied. I cannot promise you, however, that the emperor will hear your pleas. He will, Theodotus replied, his voice brimming with confidence. I know he will. You are a very persuasive man. A.D. 535, June. 8th year of the reign of Justinian, Emperor of the Romans at Constantinople. Dust swirling around him, the armored form of a man raised his spear in expectation of the coming assault. A sinewy leopard darted toward him, its claws extended for the kill. The man recoiled from the beast's attack, falling backwards, but not clumsily. He rolled heels over head and landed squarely back on his feet. Undeterred, the starved and tormented cat lunged for him again, longing to sink its sharp yellow incisors into the man's flesh. But this particular meal proved elusive. Every time the big cat leapt, its prey danced lightly away, taunting and teasing. Finally, the crazed beast sensed an opening and surged towards the man's unprotected legs, its mouth trailing frothy slaver. Its claws mere inches from gaining purchase, the man twirled away, stabbing down with his spear in the same motion. Transfixed through the throat, the leopard gave a strangled yowl, twitched violently, and then lay still. The crowd erupted. 80,000 voices went wild in unison, lauding the skill of the hunter with raucous cheers. The man removed his helmet and approached the consul's box with a triumphant swagger. That's the third leopard you've slain today, Marcellianus, the consul greeted him, looking not completely pleased. 2 leopards and a lioness, if you please, Excellency, the man replied without the slightest trace of humility. I suppose you'll be wanting more laurels, the consul asked, knowing well the answer. He snapped his fingers, and a servant handed him a wreath. If you wouldn't mind, Excellency, I'd prefer to receive my laurels from the Lady Antonina this time. A flame of anger flared in the consul's eyes, assuaged quickly by the ready hand of his wife. I shall oblige you this once, impertinent rogue, she warned, fixing a wreath roughly on his unkempt mop of hair. But you would do better to curb your wit and court my husband's favor. Does your husband yet lack for admirers, dear lady? The man taunted. Methinks he has an entire hippodrome full of them. The crowd roared again, full throat, as Marcellianus raised his hands victoriously and gestured toward the consul. Hold your tongue, vermin, Antonina stamped, her voice drowned out by the noise. I am a green, Marcellianus winked. I was born with a loose tongue and a healthy dislike for butchers like your husband. Marcellianus strode back onto the hippodrome track to continuing cheers, removed his spear from the slain leopard, and made his exit like a conquering hero. In the consul's box, Belisarius merely shook his head with disgust. Praise God, this Gehenna will soon be over, he muttered. You are a remarkably poor politician, my husband, Antonina chided. A proper statesman would have smiled benignly at that insulting vagabond, while simultaneously plotting his death. Belisarius growled. I've had enough of this. His eyes searched the tiers of seating behind the box. Alighting on a familiar face, Belisarius cupped his hands around his mouth. Photius! A sturdy lad of 15 jumped to attention and made his way forward. Yes, father? For the rest of today, you are consul by proxy. Hail, Excellency. I am, the boy responded, astounded. Sit there beside your mother. I am going to the Strategion. Belisarius stood and made his way out, followed by a retinue of his guardsmen. His face alight with joy, Photius leapt into his father's place, already anticipating the next event. Belisarius stepped out of the hippodrome, and his Bucellarii, the far-famed biscuit-eaters of his household guard, immediately formed a cordon around him. As soon as people on the street recognized him, a flock of petitioners approached. Once famous only for his exploits in battle, he had now become even more beloved for his legendary generosity. Dashing between two of his guardsmen, a boy dropped to his knees in front of Belisarius, his hands raised in supplication. "O General, please. My father is crippled, and the tax collectors have put him in prison until he pays his debt. Can you help us, my lord? Please help us." Belisarius sighed. He was in no mood for this at the moment. "Not today, lad," he muttered, giving his guardsmen the signal to move on. "Please, my lord," the boy cried, grabbing Belisarius around the knees. "My father served with you at Darus. He was injured in the battle. I beg you." Belisarius stopped. "His name?" he barked. "Learchos of Sardis," the boy burst out, straining in the guardsman's grip. "He served in the infantry under the General Dorotheus." Belisarius had no memory of the man, but at the name of his deceased friend Dorotheus he softened. "How much does your father owe?" Belisarius commanded. The boy stepped up to face him, and again dropped to his knees. 10 numismata, my lord." Belisarius snapped his fingers, and Principius stepped forward. "Give him 20. "Yes, O Magister," Principius replied without hesitation. He drew 20 heavy gold coins from a pouch, and dropped them into the boy's hands. "Be off with you now," Belisarius said kindly. "Redeem your father's debt, and tell him that Belisarius has not forgotten him." "Thank you, my lord," the boy cried, kissing his hand. "You are truly most generous, the greatest living Roman." With that he was on his feet and away in a flash. "Continue on," Principius called out to the guardsmen, "and this time tighten up formation so that the Magister may have some peace." Soon the column was on its way again, cleaving through the growing crowd of well-wishers and petitioners. "You know, that boy was probably just a lying grifter with a pretty tale," Principius remarked. "I know it," Belisarius replied, "but he knew the right thing to say to me today." Once in the Strategion section of the city, the crowds diminished as the number of idle soldiers on the street increased. This was the district nearby the barracks of the executors and scholarians, the guardians of the sacred palace, as well as any praesental troops who happened to be in the capital. High-ranking provincials who had the emperor's trust also quartered small numbers of their household troops in this district to serve as bodyguards while their masters were in the city. Belisarius dismissed all of his men except for Principius, then entered the tavern known as the Golden Diadem, a watering hole exclusively for military officers. When Belisarius entered, 20 heads turned and let out an impromptu cheer. "Hail, Consul! May you triumph!" Belisarius acknowledged the acclamation with a smile and an upraised hand, and then proceeded directly through the hall, seeking his favorite table in the open courtyard. Once through the ornately carved wooden doors, however, he stepped into a scene hardly dissimilar from that which he had left behind in the hippodrome. 2 sturdy fighters sparred with wooden swords, one of whom he immediately recognized as his guardsman, Catullus. "Care to place a wager, Consul?" the old General Bessus asked, a wide grin on his craggy face. "Your man Catullus is putting on quite a display against Ragobert the Lombard." "I've had enough of wagers today," Belisarius replied, absorbed by the swordplay. "Ragobert has bested 2 of your men already today, Consul," Bessus said with a hoarse laugh. "Good ones, too." Half of the men in the courtyard let out a raucous cheer, as Ragobert suddenly parried, ducked, spun, and swept Cutullus's feet out from under him. The man crashed onto his back with the Lombard's sword point at his throat. Money changed hands as the barbarian paraded victorious back to his comrades. "Magister," Principius said in a whisper, "most of the men here are Narses the eunuch's household." With a motion of his head, Principius indicated the place where Justinian's grand chamberlain sat, surrounded by the huge men of his retinue. Seated beside him was the General John the Thracian, the nephew of Vitalian, a one-time comrade of Belisarius known by peers and enemies alike as Bloody John. Narses had already spied Belisarius and stood up. With his head barely reaching the chest of the gigantic Herul warrior next to him, Welcome, O Consul, Narses said courteously. It is said that your guardsmen are the most fearsome warriors of all, and brilliantly trained, so naturally I wanted to test my own men against them. Naturally, Belisarius replied. And how have they fared? Narses offered an ingratiating smile. To my amazement, they have done quite well. I don't believe we've lost a single bout yet, have we? He looked to Bloody John for confirmation. 6 up, 6 down, O Consul, John smirked. The men around him chuckled menacingly. These are not ordinary fighters, Magister, Principius said under his breath. These are barbarians recruited from Dalmatia. All of them are nobles raised on the battlefield. I am told, Narses continued, that you are a fair challenger in the sparring ring yourself as a youth. Care to test your mettle against one of my fellows? Come, Grand Chamberlain, that is an insult to his rank, Principius shouted. No man is permitted to lay violent hand on the consul during his term. If that is his excuse, I will accept it, Narses chuckled, and the men behind him did likewise. Belisarius, for his part, put off his consular cloak, and strode to the center of the courtyard. I am in the mood to stretch my limbs, Principius, he said aloud. See, I have put off my rank, so that I may spar without encumbrance. The men on both sides of the courtyard cheered, and a few raced into the hall to announce the news. Magister, no, Principius said quietly but insistently. They demean you with this challenge, and are attempting to sully your reputation among the men. Belisarius smiled. Let them try. No, let me fight as your proxy. I will win, I swear it. Step back, Principius, Belisarius said. Do not enter the fight no matter what happens, is that clear? Yes, Magister, the guardsman replied, crestfallen. Narses selected a tall, muscular Lombard warrior to face Belisarius. With a full head of curly blonde hair and a beard to match, the man had a fearsome aspect, and stood a full head taller than Belisarius, who was himself over 6 Roman feet. What weapon? Belisarius asked. Sword, the man replied, brandishing a long, heavy practice sword before him with 2 hands. Belisarius selected a wooden longsword with a Thracian hilt from the rack, and faced his opponent. All around them, the swelling crowd in the courtyard busily placed wagers. The 2 combatants circled each other cautiously. Then with a shout, the Lombard launched himself at Belisarius, swinging his weapon with the fluid, practiced strokes of an expert. Belisarius dodged right, then ducked under a sweeping lateral swipe meant for his head. Rolling on the ground, he sprung back to his feet, his sword at the ready. He blocked the Lombard's next thrust with authority, knocking the man off balance. As he stumbled, the Lombard left his midsection open for an instant, and Belisarius did not hesitate. He drove his fist hard into the man's stomach, doubling him over. Then with 2 hands he smashed the hilt of his sword on the Lombard's back, and knocked him heavily to the ground. The man quickly rolled over and tried to rise, but Belisarius swatted the wooden sword out of his hands, and stuck his own into the man's face. A tremendous roar went up from the assembled men, and 100 different conversations began in excited voices. Narses and his men stood by in complete shock at how quickly their champion had been defeated. In the confusion, Narses nodded to 3 of his other men, one of whom picked up a wooden stool and smashed it over Belisarius's back. The general fell to one knee, and all conversation was silenced. Belisarius's guardsmen immediately stood and brandished steel swords, threatening Narses' men. One man jumped up from the crowd and got in between Belisarius and his assailants, his fists at the ready. He was a tall and solidly built man, with wavy brown hair, which hung loosely about his clean-shaven face. Though his cheeks were bare, his skin was dark and lined as that of a man who had recently returned from the wastes of the East. His fighter's stance and well-muscled arms indicated immediately that this was not a man to be trifled with. Let's take all 3, Magister, he huffed as Belisarius got to his feet. 3 is hardly a challenge for men such as we, Constantinus, Belisarius winked, shaking off the impact. Constantinus smiled knowingly in response. Friends from childhood, the 2 had become estranged as their military careers and personal lives took different paths. But since Belisarius's triumphant return from Africa, they had put aside their differences and renewed their friendship. Put your swords away, Belisarius demanded of his men. Tossing a wooden sword to Constantinus, he motioned to Narses' men. Come. His 3 assailants grabbed practice swords of their own. No, all of you, Belisarius motioned. All of you, come on. The remaining barbarian henchmen looked at Narses, who glared back at them with consternation. Finally, he gave a slight nod, and all 10 of the remaining men advanced. Belisarius and Constantinus gave them no quarter. Whirling through their futile strokes, parries, and thrusts, they struck one after another. Belisarius downed a muscular herald with a blow across the forehead. Constantinus felled 2 more in quick succession, sweeping the legs out from under the first, and striking the second with a hard blow to the midsection. Soon the ground was littered with groaning men, battered and bruised by the masterful display of Roman swordsmanship. The spectators swarmed the 2 as soon as the last barbarian went down. Raising them up and singing a paean of victory, they carried them 3 times around the courtyard, setting them down only when Belisarius complained that he was getting thirsty. 50 men simultaneously offered to buy him a drink. "And what of you, bloody John?" Belisarius called out. "It has been a long time since you and I have sparred, has it not?" A vain man, John was wise enough not to rise to the bait. "Magister, I would be honored, but perhaps another day, for I am fresh, and you are no doubt winded from your exertions." "Indeed," Narses huffed, thoroughly annoyed by the proceedings. He stared at Belisarius, scrutinizing the general's handsome bearded face, and fighting down the wave of jealousy that erupted involuntarily from his innards. "I have underestimated you for the last time, consul." Before Belisarius could respond, a messenger from the palace raced in and stood before them. "Lord Grand Chamberlain, Lord Consul," the man huffed, out of breath, "both of you are summoned to the Emperor's presence at once."